Good evening.
Hold that up to you. Yeah. So the people can hear you.
Okay, I'll try this.
Yeah.
I am Martha Pearl James Grout. I was born in Quincy, Illinois in 1852. My father, Marcus Lindsay James, came to Douglas County in 1860 during the mining era. Father returned to Illinois in 1863 to bring my mother Margaret and his 3 children to Colorado because of asthma with Margaret and myself. I was 9 years old at the time.
Why not hold this one?
Okay, we'll see if I can hold this one still. Or at least still enough to see. We came in an ox-pulled wagon within the wagon trains. Because of my asthma and my mother's asthma, my father came at a slower pace. He would stop at settlements and wait for another wagon train to come along. My brother John and my sister Alice and I walked most of the way. During that time, the women would sleep and children would sleep in the wagons, and the men would sleep under the wagons to protect us from the Indian raids and so forth. Alice had lovely auburn hair, and the Indians thought that a redhead was luck. So my family had to keep very close watch on her because the Indians would take her if they didn't. One of the Indian tribes offered them 100 ponies for the auburn hair girl. Father said that we children had to be polite to the Indians and we had to shake their hands and be friendly. My mother made biscuits on the old steel stove that we carried in the wagons. The Indians seemed to like that, and most of the time they would be friendly to us. It took us 8 weeks to come to about 600 miles from Illinois. On arriving in Aurora, we came on out to Douglas County. My father had worked on the tea ranch that was owned by George Ratcliffe, and he worked there several years following his return to Colorado. By 1871, he was able to get property, and he built us a cabin on the acreage that is near West Plum Creek and the Wolfenberger Road and Perry Park Road. It was a typical farm place. We raised beef cattle, dairy cattle. During the summer, we would run our cattle, the beef cattle, on the National Forest, along with many other ranchers around the area. My father's cattle brand was 3K, and mine was DJ Bar. We children helped around the ranch with all the chores that were done. Things like feeding the chickens, milking the cows, taking care of the horses, helping mother in the house with the sewing and the baking and the churning, all the household things that needed done. Because of the location of our ranch, my father was appointed a U.S. postmaster, and he also was a justice of peace. He married many of the couples that were around the Douglas County at that time. It was very important to my family that we children get a good education. We lived about 6 miles from the nearest school, so he hired a teacher to come to our home to teach us. One of his sayings was that we needed an education so that we would be better, so that the world would be better for our being in it. He also gave each of us college courses. So he was a well-educated man himself and wanted his children to be. More than once, Indians would come to raid the nearby homesteads. They tended to leave our home alone because my mother, once again, baked biscuits. During one of the raids at our neighbors' homes, the Indians gathered up the books. They knew that the books were extremely important for the pioneers. And there was also jam in the house that had been canned and put on shelves. So they gathered the books, put them in the middle of the floor, and poured jam on them. During one of the raids, the women were not safe, and the men would keep their guns and so forth outside. They had asked my mother and the rest of us to go to a fort in Franktown. Well, it seemed like to me Franktown was a long way from West Plum Creek. So why they didn't come to the fort up here, we have no idea. But in any case, my mother was taking care of a sick woman, and she refused to go. So we were taken out to the haystack and hid in the haystack, and were told if the Indians came to go to the creek. Well, the dogs barked, we got excited, and ended up in the house. As it was, things went fine. In 1872, the neighbors decided that it was time for a church. So Newton Grout was hired for $200 to design and build the church, which is now the St. Philip's Church in the Field. The work was completed in 22 days in the middle of the winter. My father had help from Leonard Wells and Upton T. Smith. Many of the neighbors helped with donations as well as time. Some of them are old timers that you might know. There were the Dakins, the Balls, the Curtises, the Huxtables, the McEnroys, to name a few. During this time, they hired a circuit minister that came around from village to village, town to town, and preached. The people of the St. Philip's Church had saved $600 to finish the inside of the church. So he was there for a few times. They believed he was honest and trustworthy, and he was in charge of the $600 that they had been donated to finish the church. Well, lo and behold, he left with the money. My mother was extremely concerned that we needed a cemetery. So she was able to get a man that owned the property around where the church had been built to donate that land for a cemetery. She and I baked the cake for the dedication of that church. And we also, during the memorial time, we picked wildflowers, made bouquets, and wreaths to place on the graves, particularly the veterans. That tradition has been carried on by my daughter, my granddaughter, my great-granddaughter, and my great-great-grandchildren. In 1879, do you think my Parkinson's has kicked in and I need help? Thank you. In 1879, no, let me back up a minute. Newton Grout, a neighbor along the Jackson Creek, came to Colorado in 1869 with Upton T. Smith, and they worked as carpenters and surveyors during that area. They went as far as the St. Louis Valley, which they figured was about 500 miles round trip. During that time, they looked at all the land and ended up thinking that Douglas County, Jackson Creek, was the very best. Newton lived in a log cabin that he had built on his 2,000 acres, and his brother had a ranch adjoining his that was called the Devil's Head Ranch. His brother raised bees and sold the honey to make a living. Therefore, they called him Honey Bob. In 1879, after asking me to marry him, Newton built a large two-story house on the ranch. We got married in May of 1880. We raised 6 children on that lovely ranch. We held many dances and parties there. I had a grand piano in the house. I'm not sure if they took it to the barn, as a lot of the neighbors did at that time, and had their barn dances, but they may have used it in the house or around the house. Our ranch was known all over the county. It was one of the most beautiful ranches and most prosperous in the area. Newton had put in an irrigation system and raised lots of apple trees, cherry trees, blackberries, cherries, melons, every kind of vegetable you can imagine. I canned many, many jars of vegetables and fruit and meat to keep us going during the winters. We also raised beef cattle, milk cows, horses, pigs, and chickens. In the fall, we would take the apples to be sold in Denver. We also made cider in a large porch at the back of the house. One day, while driving a team, something frightened the horses, and they ran away, and I ended up with a broken hip. I have since walked with a limp. Robert C. Grout Sr., Newton's father, came to live with us in 1872. He built a shed with a roof that would lift up, and he could look at the moon and the stars. He loved the astronomy. He built a very powerful telescope with 14 eyepieces and a clockwork that would keep it in position, thus being able to view all the planets. That, as a side, that microscope is still at Fort Collins College. He also made a microscope, a grandfather's clock, and an inlaid table. The table was for his sister, Lizzie Smith. After Newton's death in 1901, I continued living and working on the ranch. Our daughter Margaret and her husband Herb Stewart came to live with me after their marriage in 1908 until 1915, when they bought a piece of land about 3 miles from us. Their 3 older children were born on the ranch. Okay, you have to turn the page. While they were living here, one of my granddaughters fell in the irrigation ditch that ran just back of the porch. I was so frightened that I ran right through the screen door without opening it. After Margie and Herb moved, our daughter Lenore and her husband rented the ranch for many, many years. I moved into Denver with the daughter until my death at age 78. After coming across and not being thought that I would survive, 78 seemed like a long time. Margie and Herb had 6 children, of which was Amy. One was Amy. Amy and her husband had a daughter named Beverly. So you see, my great-granddaughter is able to tell my story, so people know the hardships and hard work and the happy times it took to build our country. My mother always believed work was a secret to happiness. In 2002, a diary of pearls that she wrote in 1874 on an old calendar that had been used for other things was found in the wall of one of the Jackson Creek Ranch house. The diary tells the story of a hard-working pioneer family. This diary is preserved in the Douglas County Library, so anyone has access to it. The Jackson Creek Ranch still exists. It was bought by a developer from Denver who planned to make a subdivision and golf course. This has not happened due to a lack of water. Okay.
Great.
Anyway, I thought I had that on.